All right, everybody, and welcome to this next episode of Innovation Vertex. This week we have a special guest for you. Her name is Michela Ledwidge from Mod. She is the creative and technical director there. Michela is an industry veteran in the realm of real-time and virtual production. She has made significant contributions to the field of interactive storytelling and experience design, leveraging cutting-edge graph technologies in a new, novel, and exciting way. We'll be delving down into Mod's innovative use of graph technologies and exploring them. Michela will also share her insights into how their product Graphie came to be and what makes that product so unique. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join us for this session on Mod and what the future of graph technologies might hold. So before we dive in, I would also like to remind you that the developer conference Nodes 2023 is coming now in October and is currently open for CFPs and early registration. And Nodes is a free developer conference that is hosted during a 24-hour window with speakers from all over the world sharing their graph stories. All right, so let's have Michela up here on stream to say hi to you, everybody. Hello, Michela.
Hey, Max.
Hi. How are you doing? You're all the way over in Australia, right?
I am, yes. It's the end of our day here. Yeah, ready for the weekend.
Yeah, it's the beginning of my day here. It's quite interesting to be able to do these kind of podcasts from all over, from literally different sides of the world, right?
Definitely.
All right, so I'll let you start a little bit with your pitch and everything that you have prepared, and then we'll get to know you a little bit after that. If that does that sound all right for you?
Sure. I mean, pitch. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I'm happy to tell you about what we've been doing with graphs. And yeah, I've got a couple. Should I put up a couple of pictures while I'm talking in this first couple of minutes? Is that yeah? Okay, wicked. So Yeah, I've been working with Neo4j for about 4 years now. And I was introduced to Neo4j because I had this crazy idea that if I wanted to do a data storytelling project, I was inspired by Al Gore and his Inconvenient Truth documentary. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to like do a data storytelling film, but with my own personal virtual world? And I started off thinking about like a planetarium, so, you know, kind of pressing buttons and lighting up the sky. And then one of my regular dev collaborators said, hey, you really need to check out these graph databases. And I got quite excited because we were doing a forensic investigation into dark money trails. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I can literally just grab virtual nodes and pull the money towards us? So anyway, I dived in, and that was about the time that the Panama Papers investigation came out that was powered by Neo4j, the International Consortium of Journalists did some cool stuff there. So anyway, we started off with the usual browser tools, then we looked at Bloom, and after a few months of getting our little node graph, knowledge graph together, we then built an interface to Neo4j running on Unreal Engine. And that got quite exciting because we then had something that was kind of like broadcast graphics quality that I could, as a presenter, go through and explore the data. But then COVID hit, and it was like, oh, maybe we should, rather than just thinking about this as a film, why don't we make it an interactive documentary and just release it on Steam so anyone in the world who's got VR equipment can explore the data themselves? Anyway, so long story short, we did that in 2001. The project was called A Clever Label, and we discovered all of these do's and don'ts on how you can manipulate graphs in VR and in AR. And people started approaching us about putting their own data in this format. And so last year we decided, let's spin off this core mechanic. That's sort of game dev speak for, like, you know, the interactive behavior, ability to grab nodes and relationships with your hand. And we started doing client work. And so this is just a peek at our favorite client to date, because A Clever Label was only 200 nodes. And then the group that managed the whole of the Asia Pacific section of the internet said, hey, could you build us a forensics tool so that our analysts can actually see the network in XR? And so that's just a glimpse of what that tool looked like, and which brings us to today. And we're busy working on new features for this core system, which is essentially plugins for Unreal Engine. So yeah, we're just exploring from the perspective of an indie studio the creative and technical potential of what we're calling Grapho. It's a very Aussie Australian sounding name, and it's basically graph data science and storytelling.
Wow. All right. That sounds amazing. So you're actually using a game engine and hooking that up to a graph database to be able to literally dive into the data.
Yeah, that's right. That's the idea. That is it. We're not trying to say we're innovating in terms of the structure of the graphs.
Yeah.
We love all of the built-in algorithms that come with Neo4j, which we're using more and more of. But our thing is all about the presentation layer.
Oh wow. Yeah. And how did you think of it, like XR is the way to go for this? How did you how did that thought come into your mind?
Well, what's that phrase that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail? So we were a studio doing a lot of XR work already, and so this was less about saying that we had a fixed idea. It was a question. There was a lot of hype about VR in particular a few years ago, and I was a little bit suspicious of some of that hype, especially about that term, the VR is an empathy engine. I didn't quite believe that, but I was, once we started doing VR development in this generation of tech, because I've been doing VR for quite a long time, but one of the cool things is that the ability to play with scale. And so I was
Right.
just thinking, if you've got a data set that's this big, or you need to zoom in and out, like there is something really powerful about just being physically able to use your hands.
Yeah.
It's almost like the most natural, organic interface. So the question was, does this help people? Does this assist? It was actually the question, the actual question was, we're drowning in data, so can VR presentation of complex topics
Right.
be helpful? It was as simple as that.
Yeah. So it kind of helps you comprehend, right, when you're actually moving in a virtual space, as well as getting the visuals and the audio and everything. It's like another layer of learning and like gathering information, right, when you're able to actually experience it in that sense.
That's the hypothesis. I mean, if you've never experienced VR or XR devices at all, some
Hmm.
people are so overwhelmed that it doesn't help your job of introducing them to a particular data set. But I do think that once you get over that initial, the novelty of it, there's something nice about having a virtual space to reflect in.
Right.
And it's still really early. I'm not going to sit here and claim that we've discovered something, that everything's going to go into VR for this purpose. But one thing I have been very interested in observing is that you can find someone who says, I've grabbed this node of data, I've
Right.
grabbed this node of data, and they say to me, oh yeah, I know this, and I know this. And then it's like, oh, what's that relationship? And just obviously that's what someone using the 2D
Yeah.
tools does anyway, but just watching people go, how's that related? And just go like that, and seeing the metadata appear.
And on all the relationships kind of just gets, oh, that's really interesting. So how did you so you is this like one of your, is this like a side project for mod, or is this like some of your your core venture now, or how are you looking at it in like within mod?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the studio exists to do three things. We do original work, we do R&D, we do services work. And typically the services work pays for the success, the profitability of our services work is what allows us to do more. So the pilot was put out as a free VR title on Steam. So it wasn't a commercial activity. It was an artistic experiment. There was a bit of activism in it. I'm a trans woman. I was a bit disturbed by what I was seeing 5 years ago. Things have kind of gone ballistic since then in terms of what's happened in the UK and the US around anti-trans sentiment. But originally it was just, wow, there's some really big money in Australia behind the anti-LGBTQI movements. Where's this money coming from? So I was just doing my little cheeky experiment to see if this
follow the money trail, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a depressing topic. So I was thinking, oh, look, I do cool stuff with all these new technologies. Could I take a depressing topic and make it more engaging for people through VR presentation? But look, to be honest, I don't know how, like, we've spun this off as a commercial library and started selling licenses because there's been some interest.
Right.
It wasn't, so we're really early days. I guess you could say it's early market testing with a few customers. And it's the sort of thing, I would love to say that we spun off this out of an indie doco into a separate company and sold it. That would be really cool. But at the moment, it's like a startup venture that's come out of an artwork.
So you're trying to find that kind of product market fit to see kind of where can this fit in with mod, or should it be its own thing, or
Exactly.
will there attract any customers? But okay, so it's like an exploratory kind of journey that you're on to see if there's a possibility to build something around Grapho as a product.
Yeah, that's right. Regardless of regardless of that, we are using it as a mechanic for our next game, which is an easy step for us, because it was kind of a creative idea in the first place. But look, it's been really interesting. We're talking to car companies, pharma. I think working as a director on set, everyone's there with their clipboards and iPads now accessing information. I love the idea that an actor in the future will be able to just grab their script virtually and look at it. And, I see it as a interactive in-camera visual effects tool, but I think probably it'll be another 10 years before that would be kind of accepted on a film or TV set. But at this stage, it's pure R&D.
Oh, that's interesting. So what kind of technologies are else are in this kind of technology stack? You're using Unreal Engine, using Neo4j. What else type of technologies are you using?
Well, it's so in terms of the tech stack, so Neo4j is the persistent data layer. I hadn't heard of Neo4j when we started Clever Labels, so I was envisaging it would be a Jupyter notebook or a Google spreadsheet at the back end. So I've got my own little Python server that talks to Neo4j and is basically the API service. And I think that's actually proven good, because it means that a company can use Grapho without having to learn Unreal Engine. They can adapt our sample API server and do it that way. And then Unreal Engine, it's not really one thing. It's quite a beast. It's about 25 years old now, and you've got everything from machine learning libraries to physics libraries to pretty much every protocol and media you can imagine. So the core elements of what we do in Neo4j is make API calls out, so that you've got, similar to Neo4j Bloom or browser, we can hard code queries. We can just say, I'll grab existing queries from the server, or there could be hard coded Grapho specific metadata in the database itself. So part of it's just about ingesting cloud graph services. Then secondly, we've got this user interface mechanism. I wish I had 3D. I'm going to 3D print it soon so that people can see what it is. But I've got something similar on my desk from one of our Wi-Fi hubs. So you've basically got this like a donut type object. And
like a circle shape,
shamelessly nicked from films like Tron. It's like a big convenient sort of handle. And so that's like literally your handle to get to the data. And then you can open and close subgraphs, like any amount of node.
So that's kind of how you dig in. You kind of use that donut that's around your hand, and then you kind of push into data nodes and twist and turn to kind of expose or hide whatever is in there. Is that
interesting? Yes and no. So we've got multiple. So the idea is that you can have any number of handles based on how many bookmarks or starting points you want for your data, but you're not holding on to it all the time. The idea originally is that, you're knocking things out of the way and grabbing and summoning. We've got this telekinesis type mechanism that we stole from the hit game Half-Life Alyx that Valve Software made. So you can it looks like you're fishing, but you can kind of go like that, and nodes will come flying towards you. But what you said is very interesting, because you know how like in gymnasts, they have like the rings as one of the sports where they can pull up, and it's all about...
Exactly,
So one of my creative ideas is that we're actually using the graph, not just because we're using it in the context of entertainment for our next game, and we're actually using it to control martial arts. And so you're actually learning to explore graphs, to solve puzzles. But I'm very interested in that idea that this becomes almost like a weapon or something that you keep holding on to. But at the moment, corporate users, no, it's more like you've just...
So these handles are basically floating around, and you get to kind of grab them down and kind of see what's in. Is it like what's inside the handle, or is it like, can you create a new handle, or how do you...
Look, at the moment, we've steered quite deliberately. We don't do any graph creation within Grapho. It's purely visualization of content that's created in existing tools. That will come, I'm sure. But part of the reason we steered clear of it was I kind of wanted to have parity to what I saw Neo4j doing in 2D.
Right.
Because I thought as a way to move from 2D to 3D, like it's over. Part of the problem we're trying to solve is too much data, too many options as well. So I'm trying to see how little we can do in a way, because we can always make the interface more complicated. But the idea is a bit like a steering wheel on a car. There's such a danger of cognitive load when you talk about this. So at the moment, the handles are pretty basic, and it's literally just to visually distinguish between how do I kind of get rid of this stuff as a group, or how do I open all of this stuff as a group?
Because you can load in basically any data, right? You can plug in. So you don't do you ingest it through Grapho, or do you just have a database with all of your data and just plug into that and everything will just appear? Or how does
we're still working it out. So the first use case, when we had a documentary, we literally had the live database and then the staging server. So the user never saw, the user only ever was dealing with one database on one server.
Right.
Now that we've started looking at corporate use cases, and what I was demonstrating at Graph Summit last couple of weeks ago is just by going to my settings menu in VR, I can be jumping between any number of API servers, and each server, if it's an enterprise server, has any number of databases on it.
Oh, wow.
And that, for me, that's great, because I'm a small business owner. I can now take around a mobile VR headset, and on stage or at for demoing, I can jump. I have access to so many different knowledge graphs, but I'm not entering any text. I'm just saying, choose this server. Let's see what databases are on that server that I have permission for.
Yeah. I think this might become very, very interesting now when we have all of this large, what's it called, large language models and everything like that, and people will start to store their own vectors and vector spaces, and those vectors doesn't really, or embeddings as they are called, like are just numerical representations of stuff, and those doesn't make very much sense unless you put like virtual dimensions to it. So I think that might be a very interesting addition as well, like in the future, to be able to visualize what's actually going through these language models and how are they kind of picking and choosing what to display and what not to display.
Oh, definitely. No, everything's moving so quickly. I mean, I feel quite strongly that we should really focus on polishing the user experience, because there's been lots of attempts to do this over the years.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons they haven't worked is that they're not robust enough. Like they're like a one-off proof of concept, but when you throw lots of different use cases, it doesn't really satisfy a broad collection of use cases. Right. So I'm thinking that whether the large language model integration is within Grapho or just within the back-end service infrastructure, I'm not sure yet. It's kind of like, And the irony is that I thought we kind of over-engineered stuff having Unreal Engine as our platform for this. But now that Unreal Engine supports all the machine learning frameworks for the purposes of our animation and things like that, we don't have to solve the integration issues for any of these new things. The engine vendors like Epic Games just are constantly keeping up with this enormous amount of change in the market.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. So when you look at like the clients that you have now today, how are you creating value for them?
Look, it's a good question. We've only got a few Grapho clients so far. So the main, there's really two broad areas. The first one is presentation of your knowledge graph in a novel way. And because we were focusing on non-technical users, you could argue that even something like Neo4j, Bloom, or Browser isn't really appropriate for a non-technical Neo4j user. Like you want to kind of make it simpler or prettier or whatever. So that's one key area. Then the second area is, as consultants working across not just entertainment but other sectors, I'm finding Neo4j to be a really useful personal productivity tool. So a couple of years ago I was doing, and this was while I was originally developing the first iteration of Grapho, I was using a Neo4j graph just to keep track of people on this super large engineering project I was consulting on. And I was using Bloom to do screenshots for my reports. And I was told to stop doing that because they looked too good, and then all the other consultants would then have to do it. I thought, okay,
that's a life hack, right? Just get your graphs in Bloom, right?
That's right. But there were things I couldn't do in 2D, and it was like, okay, well, it would be really nice if even if I don't need XR, just being able to change perspective easily and manipulate stuff in 3D for my own reflections on what does this even mean. So I find so consulting and producing public facing. So we've got a couple of kind of trade show style interactives underway. I think that's probably going to be a good opportunity for us going forward. So not necessarily large knowledge graphs. They might just be kind of like a digest or a very limited subset of a larger knowledge base, but something that they want to put in front of the general public or at a trade show, as rather than just putting up kind of web pages, being able to allow people to see the relationships in a little bit more of a playful way, not necessarily to make decisions, but just to show the interconnectivity of things in a different way. So those are the two areas that we're focused on at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, like exploration is a part of making good decisions, right? So even if you're not talking about like, this is not the tool to look over your expense reports, maybe that doesn't make sense, right? But like when you're trying to find that new niche in the market, or when you're trying to get like this overview of how is this operation being run, or where are my shipping containers like, then you need these visual layers to be able to comprehend that large amount of complexity, right? And I think VR, XR, and these technologies, just by adding that dimension to it, makes it a little bit less complex or complicated to comprehend in that sense. And so where do you see like these technologies going in the future? Like if you look at XR, VR, metaverse, whatever you want to call it, right? Where do you see these technologies going in the future? Is this like something that we are just a hype train right now, or is this something that we will leverage for years to come?
Yeah, look, I personally think we'll see more adoption of AR than VR. It's just really expensive at the moment, and I think it'll probably be another decade before it's like as available as mobile phones are today.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm not a marketing expert, and all I know is that I think it was the 90s when I did my first VR work. I haven't stopped using VR since the 90s because for certain things it's really useful. As I said, scale's a great reason. But I don't evangelize it because I think there's a huge difference between trying to get huge numbers of people to adopt it versus going, well, these use cases are definitely useful for niche things. So I suspect that there won't be mass adoption anytime soon just because of the expense. But at the same time, if you look at like this Australian startup called Canva, which I don't know if you've heard it, CANVA, but they've done incredibly well the last couple of years with like templated websites and graphic design. So everything's templates. And I'm sure you've got them in, your part of the world, you'd have your own brands as well. But I think we'll see more and more templated XR experiences. So you don't have to be a specialist to just dive in and play. So at the moment, for example, we have 2 layout algorithms for Grapho, and the more customers we have, the more conversations we have, the more ideas for other kind of layout templates appear. And so I can imagine in a couple of years' time, you know, we might have something like the APOC library, but for spatial visualization algorithms, which is just like a greatest hits of everything that anyone's ever done. And like you said, you know, if you're in that exploratory phase with your data, instead of just browsing fonts, you might be just browsing, you know, templated visualizations without any skill, just because people like us who've been crazy enough to prototype this stuff have come, oh, this works. And then it becomes a well-known, and then, you know, the next vendor says, oh yeah, well, we'll include Michela's crazy thing. And over time we have a more of a visual language for how to work.
Yeah. That's an interesting aspect. Like, so kind of, you're talking about templating the visual experience, right? Like you're trying to get to like, all right, so this type of data would work good with this type of template, and but it might not work for everything. You might want to be able to customize it for different types of use cases. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, I work as an artist sometimes. You know, I've got different sides of my brain. So even as you're replaying that idea, I'm like, well, I get bored if it's a template. I move on to the next thing. But if you're in a business and you don't have a remit to produce art, but you need to produce a report that looks engaging in the next 2 hours, then of course you're going to look for engaging visualizations. And that's
right.
I think traditionally that's the role of the creative industries. You know, we come up with new things, we develop new paradigms, and then they become commodified to the point that, well, they're dull and boring, but we understand what they are. So I think, you know, the fact that there's not that many people at the moment performing and presenting in XR on stages, in 10 years' time, there'll be at least 10 times as many people doing that, if not 1,000 times. And the performance and presentations that work will just become part of the vernacular.
So you think that this will become so mainstream that like anyone making presentations will kind of leverage this third dimension in their visual presentations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a given. I mean, I used to always stay at the start of every presentation. I'm just trying to kill PowerPoint. And then the irony is that it's so new that I always have a PowerPoint for emergency purposes anyway.
Right.
If I jump straight into XR, people don't know what the hell you're doing. So it actually, from a communication perspective at the moment, it's best that I start in PowerPoint and then say, okay, now let's try something a bit more interesting. And then I jump into it. But I think there's a lot, you still see people struggling with their PowerPoints.
Yeah.
So if there's a way of,
But I mean, like if we're thinking about ideas and when you're trying to communicate that, usually like a whiteboard or just pen and paper will get that idea across without it being too complicated. Sometimes you try to get an idea across with technology or some visuals that just make things even more complicated. So I think it's important to find those kind of use cases where it makes things less complicated to get your message across than just pen and paper, right? Because otherwise you might just add more complexity to something that is do you see what I'm
and I 100% agree. And so I guess my challenge to you is that if you instinctively go for, say, the whiteboard as thinking about that's how I present, why don't more people use that for their corporate presentation? And I would argue that that's because the stages aren't designed well for that. But you could have your virtual pen and paper, you could be drawing your graph on your white paper, and then as so I think part of my attraction to XR is because in some ways I find it more human to be able to grab things rather than use a mouse. I love haptics, and it's very hard to communicate the power of the haptics, so that like when you grab stuff in Grapho, you feel it. Like if you knock a node or a relationship, you can feel it there. And so there is a level to which I think a lot of XR practitioners are striving to find organic connections, even though it sounds kind of, and you're right, there's huge traps and there's danger that it just becomes all too complicated. And that's why I say, I'm not saying this is the answer for everything, but in the same way as we saw in East Africa, the jump where you've got Maasai herdsmen doing work for call centers on their phones, like looking after their herds on the savannah, and they're never going to own a desktop computer. I think, you know, if we look at the long view, XR interfaces that are more intuitive than using a mouse and keyboard on a 2D display will be the first interface that people come across. You know, I don't think this stuff's going back in the box.
No, that's true. That's true. Something that I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that it's gone from kind of this sci-fi space, right, into reality. And it's been fiction, but it's a reality now, right? And that reality is expanding, and that is engaging. I would say.
Yeah, I think it's important to be pragmatic, though. You know, like one of the things that I like about our little project is that we can just make videos out of it. Like, it's not even saying the value of the Grapho value proposition is that you have to go into XR. It could just be the CEO goes in and looks cool manipulating the report, and they take a video, or they So I honestly, I'm not on a quest to get everyone in XR, but I am on a quest to have a useful storytelling augmentation approach that's just beyond what the data specialists have.
Yeah. We do have a question here from one of our viewers, and I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but if an object is scanned or detected and collect data from surrounding objects, which do we want to do? And then from that data, do we grab relations? Is that possible? So am I understanding this question correctly, that when he means an object is scanned, maybe he means like data gets into your context or whatever, and you kind of grab relationships as well as nodes, or I'm not completely sure what Eshwar is trying to say.
Look, without understand, I don't fully understand the question, but at the moment we're doing very basic logic in terms of we're using a force-directed graph, and we have, if you're familiar with say the Neo4j Bloom tool, where you have context menus that are attached to each node and relationship, we've created an equivalent experience so that whatever you're holding, you can do, you could run queries or just do filters and things. But in terms of higher order logic of how things combine, we're not making any preconceptions in terms of this being a generic tool, but we're saying, hey, we're using arguably the most powerful game engine on the planet. So if you've got a particular, because they're literally game levels, right? The experience you see is happening in an Unreal Engine game level. So if you've got specific behaviors, specific logic, you need to run queries based on proximity, or that's part of the reason why I kept the API outside of Unreal, because I'm thinking we want to be able to run and keep up with the creative instincts of developers, and there's no reason why, as things change spatially, you could be doing all kinds of contextual additional queries that the user's not actually controlling, just to provide relevance. But at the moment, it's all we're really focusing on the user feeling like they're in control. So there's not much implicit interactions with the graph database. It's all pretty explicit, if that makes sense.
Right, right. So if you wanted to see this in action, you have the Clever Label documentary that you can download on Steam, right? And is there any way to get your hands on Grapho at the moment, or do you have to reach out to you to?
Yeah, so it's really early days, and we're only making it at the moment. We're only making it available under our software as a service license. As a, you have access to our source code, and you can pay us to customize it. If people know what they want to
Right.
do, they can just license it and use it. But we haven't got a consumer edition yet. We do sell some plugins on the Unreal Engine store, but partly because it's early days, and we've got quite an ambitious roadmap. We haven't done a release as like a developer edition B2C as yet.
So what type of features are you looking into kind of adding as we go forward?
Well, funny you should say that, because I probably should. I've just suddenly realized this is quite a technical audience, so I should probably find our roadmap, because we do have, I have put up on Trello a roadmap. The number one feature I'm really excited about is more multi-user collaboration stuff. That's really.
So you'll be able to have like a multi-user experience. You can like multiplayer,
right.
but so you can go in there together and kind of, oh, look at this thing, and show each other. Is that?
Yeah, and we already have some. One of the very first things we did was build what we call the spectator view. So we already have the capability, which this was like the concept art that we did originally.
Can you zoom in a little bit more? I think it's hard.
Oh, yeah, sure.
See on stream.
Yeah. So this was the concept art when we had when we got our first customer. I did this concept art to say we had a PC VR like solo user experience, and I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could use Unreal Engine spectator mode, which basically says, if the VR product is running on the PC and you've got one person in VR, we can have a separate virtual camera on the desktop as well. So we already support that. So the woman in this picture can be in third person moving around, and she can see the virtual hands of the VR user as they're doing it. So that's already built in, and that's not even multiplayer. That's just saying you can have multiple cameras per instance or per computer. But because it's built on Unreal Engine, we have this really, and we've done, I mean, as a studio, we've done lots of really interesting virtual concerts and multi-user projects over the last couple of years, especially during COVID. So building in proper multiplayer support so that you can dial into a session with your team from any part of the world and all have the shared experience, that's not actually that far away. That's one of the. So the two things on our future. So you can see on this picture what we're currently doing, what we've done already, and I'm just waiting for more funding. Is we've hand tracking without even holding controllers has come a long way in the last couple of years. So we originally implemented so you don't even have to hold VR controllers. You can just use your hands. And if you don't need high performance, if you're not a gamer or a performer, that's perfectly fine for casual use. I just, when I'm presenting, I need a low latency, super exact interface to feel comfortable on stage. So I don't personally like relying on markerless tracking, but that code exists. We've done it for other projects. So we're going to add that. So for trade shows, that's really nice. You don't even have to teach people buttons. You just grab stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more intuitive, right? Because like when you have a controller, you look at it in the reality, and you'll be like, how do I find these buttons, and which one works, and which one am I supposed to? Just touching things is much more intuitive, I would say.
Exactly. So I mean, companies like Oculus have done tons of work recently to improve that. But then the multi-user support. We have you heard of? Do you know the protocol WebRTC?
Yeah, real-time communication, right? It's it's basically you stream peer-to-peer
Yeah, no
content,
doubt
right?
StreamYard that we're using at the moment is doing that right now. So
Yeah.
somebody suggested WebRTC should get an Oscar for keeping Hollywood going during COVID. And I thought that was a really good call. So we use WebRTC in Unreal Engine when instead of having the Unreal Engine project running on your computer, it's running in the cloud. And so we can give you that experience in a browser. And that is just, as one of like the early Web 1 generation,
Right.
don't talk about Web 3, not interested, but beyond that, there's the most exciting thing about the web is the WebRTC enabled applications, which allow something as simple as a Python script or something as complex as Unreal Engine to just be running as a cloud service. And then, so we've done projects in the last couple of years where it's like a concert. Max, you're going to the concert, your friends are at home. They each have an Unreal Engine instance as part of their ticket. So they're just seeing through their old phone this amazing experience. And maybe it's like a game. So you think, so as of the last version of Unreal, the ability for us to not just through the web stream a 2D view, but we can now stream a VR view has become production ready.
So you're basically using WebRTC to stream the whole 3D context. Is that so?
Yeah.
Or are you like interpolating it to like a 2D image, or is it the whole like all 3 dimensions you can move around it that you're streaming?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so WebRTC is really dumb. It doesn't know what your computer's capable of doing and what my computer's capable. It's just the handshake to say, tell me what you've got, Max, and I'll tell you what I got here. And so for the Grapho type use case, it would be, we need a 2D image for each eye, and we need to have all the I/O messages. So any button presses on a VR controller need to go backwards and forwards. And it's WebRTC is not creating a 3D anything. It's just brokering the exchange of media and data streams. And so to have a that's the trick of VR, that you're not sending a 3D world, you're sending a left and a right eye image that have such low latency in response to the movement of the body that's being tracked, that it feels like you've got that stereo perception of a virtual world.
Right. But I'm just like thinking that like even with WebRTC, that latency, that like you must send like you moving your head and stuff like that to a server, and that server has to do something and then send it back, and that latency, is that so little latency that it's actually like, or do you get some kind of stuttering in there as well?
Well, I'm not a numbers gal, but NVIDIA released their solution called Cloud XR, I think 2 years ago. And I've never seen an amazingly low latency, but I have seen Wi-Fi speeds over 5G on projects we've done recently, in the US on certain networks. So it's only getting less and less. And yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a reality check, but it's the capability of, I mean, NVIDIA came up with this term experience delivery network, which I quite like. So we all know content delivery network via static files. You asked about our tech stack earlier. Essentially, we build experience tech stacks, and the idea that it's a delivery network and you want to get it this tech stack as close to the audience as possible. So potentially it has to run in the room, but the networks are getting so good that, Google launched their Stadia cloud service a while ago. There's lots of pitfalls for early adopters, but it's all going in the same direction.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, so interesting, in fact, that we've run out of time. So I would just like to round things off. Do you have anything you want to say, Michela, before we stop?
Oh, look, no, just thanks for having me on the show. If anyone's interested in checking it out, grapho.app is the web domain. We will hopefully have a public release soon, but yeah, just reach out if you're interested in having a play, and yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Michela, for participating in the stream, and I hope you set up into this world of graphs, and that you find your way to make Grapho expand and make it easier to interact with data. And yep, thank you very much for being on Innovation Vertex, and well, have a good day. Bye,
You too.
everybody.
See ya. Bye.